Raise the vehicle with the jack until the tires are slightly off the ground. Place jack stands under the frame and allow the weight of the vehicle back down onto them. Finish removing the lug nuts and mark the stud to wheel position before removing the tires to maintain proper balance upon reassembly. Now loosen the clamp on the top of the master cylinder. This will allow room for return of the brake fluid from the calipers back into the master cylinder. Remember, you should be wearing your dust mask and safety goggles all during the installation. To remove the caliper, first remove the caliper mounting hardware. If it's your first time, we recommend only disassembling one side at a time. This will allow you to review the opposite side during reassembly. A method widely used on General Motors and some Ford vehicles requires the removal of long mounting bolts for caliper removal. Often, this requires the use of a hex bit or Torx bit socket. Another method of caliper removal used on many Ford vehicles requires the removal of a key retaining screw and with a hammer and punch, drive out the key and support spring. A method widely used on many Chrysler vehicles simply requires the removal of 2 retainer bolts and retainer clip assemblies for caliper removal. For a detailed explanation of caliper removal on your particular vehicle, we suggest you refer to a published service manual. If the caliper is tight on the rotor, place a screwdriver or pry bar between the caliper piston and the inside brake pad. Apply light pressure towards the piston to slightly open the spacing. This will allow much easier removal of the caliper assembly. Using a wire clothes hanger or a piece of wire, hang the caliper so the weight of the caliper is not on the brake hose. Now remove the old brake pads. Inspect the caliper closely for any signs of fluid leakage. If the caliper is leaking, it will need to be repaired or replaced before installing the new brake pads. Match the old pads with the new ones to make sure your replacement parts are the correct ones. Now is a good time to spread EMP disc brake quieter on the backside of the new brake pads. This will allow some time for it to set up before pad installation. To remove a spindle type rotor, remove the outer dust cap, cotter pin, lock nut and washer, and remove the outer wheel bearing. You may need to wiggle the rotor around a little to pop the bearing out. An easy way to remove the inner seal on a spindle type rotor is to reinstall the rotor and the retainer nut. Move the rotor towards the outside of the spindle to clear the outer bearing race and give the rotor a quick jerk. The seal and inner bearing will pop out of the rotor. On front-wheel drive and many four-wheel drive vehicles, the rotor can simply be pulled off from the front shaft once the caliper and front wheel are removed. You may need to spray it down with some penetrating oil and give it a couple taps with a hammer to remove it if it's corroded in place. Once the rotors are removed, make sure you mark them left and right to keep the bearings with their corresponding rotor for reassembly. Once removed, inspect the condition of the rotors. If you notice any signs of unusual wear or grooving, burn spots, scoring, or if your rotors are worn beyond the minimum thickness, replace them. The place that resurfaces your rotors will be able to check them with a special measuring tool and tell you if they are worn beyond specifications. Whenever refinishing rotors, apply a non-directional finish only. Before reassembly, thoroughly clean and inspect the wheel bearings. If they show signs of wear and pitting, replace them now to prevent further deterioration and an unexpected breakdown. Now clean the bearing surfaces on the inside of the rotor. A spray-type brake cleaner works well for this. Next, repack the wheel bearings. Put a light coat of grease on the inner and outer bearing races. Now, install the inner wheel bearing and seal. Always install new seals. Never reuse the old ones. Now reinstall the rotor, the outer bearing, and the retaining washer and nut. Tighten the nut to the correct torque. Refer to a published service manual for the correct bearing tightening specification on your vehicle. Reinstall the retaining nut and cotter pin. Lightly tap on the outer dust cap. Next, we'll prepare the caliper for reassembly. With the C-clamp and an old disc pad, compress the caliper piston all the way back into the caliper. Be careful and keep the C-clamp lined up parallel to the travel direction of the piston. This will prevent the piston from going into the caliper crooked and becoming lodged. Once the piston is compressed all the way in, remove the C-clamp and check the piston boot for damage or leaks. Before installing the new disc pads in the calipers, the sliding surfaces must be cleaned and properly lubricated. With a wire brush, file, or sandpaper, clean the surfaces that mate together. These surfaces slide over each other during normal operation of the brakes. If they are not smooth and free from corrosion, the caliper will stick, causing incorrect braking pressure on the rotor and premature pad wear. Next, using synthetic brake grease, liberally lubricate the sliding surfaces and hardware, including any mounting bolts. Making sure that care has been taken to clean all brake system components prior to assembly, install the new disc pads. Slide the caliper in place over the rotor and be careful not to get any grease or dirt on the face of the new disc pads or on the rotor surface. If you touch the rotor surface or get grease on it, make sure to clean it with brake cleaner and a clean paper towel before proceeding. Now reinstall the caliper mounting hardware and tighten securely. Check the level of the brake fluid in the master cylinder and add fluid if necessary. When at the proper level, set the cover back on the master cylinder and gently pump the brakes until a firm pedal is felt. Recheck the brake fluid level in the master cylinder, add if necessary, and reinstall the master cylinder cover. Reinstall the wheels and lug nuts. When tightening lug nuts, it is important to torque them to the proper specification. Uneven or improper torque of lug nuts can cause warpage of the brake rotor and pulsation of the brake pedal during stopping. Take the car down off the jack stands and re-torque the lug nuts. Drive the vehicle carefully for the first few hundred miles and avoid sudden stops if possible. This is called the burnish or break-in period for the new brake pads. Also, make sure to re-torque the wheel lug nuts after the first 25 miles of driving and you're done.
Let's quickly review replacing your front disc brake pads. First, safely support the vehicle and remove the front tire. Remove the master cylinder cover. Remove the caliper from the vehicle, doing only one side at a time. Remove the old disc brake pads and inspect the caliper for damage. Apply disc brake noise suppressant to the back of the new disc pads. Remove the brake rotor and inspect for damage. Have the rotor turned or replaced as needed. Reinstall the rotor along with any bearings and seals removed earlier. Using a C-clamp and the old inboard pad, compress the caliper piston completely back into the caliper. Clean all the sliding surfaces on both the caliper and the mounting brackets. Install the new disc brake pads onto the caliper. Next, install the caliper onto the rotor using new hardware. Depress the brake pedal a few times until a firm pedal is obtained and add brake fluid as needed.
The items you will need to inspect.